Hi, welcome to Space Club, where every month in this series, I, Anastasiia, will feature two sessions on the same topic, a live stream interactive conversation with a guest expert, where you will be able to ask questions in a chat on our social media, and follow-up Zoom meetup with the same expert, where you will be able to ask questions directly. And the main goal of Zoom is to discuss the topic in more detail with invited expert. Thank you once again, American Center in Moscow, for this opportunity. Today, we will talk about space resources, from unrealistic plans to bring asteroid to Earth to real-life projects. We couldn't find a better expert than one of the founders of the first in the world Space Resources program. Dr. Christopher Dreyer is currently a professor of practice in Space Resources graduate program at Colorado School of Mines. He has 2 decades of experience in technology development and extensive experience with experimental methods, regolith mechanics, instrument design, and optical laser spectroscopy methods. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
Nice to see you here. Thank you for coming.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me to talk to the audience today.
Yeah, I just want to open a secret to our audience that Chris is also my PhD advisor. So I'm not only a space journalist, but engineer and doing my PhD in space resources. Right. Thank you once again for guiding me through, I think it's my 3rd year now. And you have more than 10 students, right? Under your wings?
Right. Well, that's the PhD students, then there's masters and undergraduates doing research as well. Yeah, about 10, a little over 10.
Yeah.
Many people are going to graduate this year. It's kind of been since we started the program, adding a few people have joined every year, and I'm now looking forward to having a large number of people graduate within the next year.
So in the future, there might be free spots to join your team?
Yes, I think actually I go from 10 to maybe 2 by again in about a year. So yeah, there could be spots opening.
That's that's good to hear. Maybe someone from our audience who is planning to apply for a PhD program could check it out. And since I started this program, everyone was asking me what are space resources, and no one could really understand what I'm really doing. So if you could explain to all of us what is space resources.
Right, great. Well, that might be a good segue into the slides I prepared, which are exactly about that. So perhaps we go there. As mentioned, I'm Chris Dreyer. You could call it my full name's Christopher, but you can call me Chris. I'm a professor of practice at Colorado School of Mines. This is a position used often for teaching and research here at Mines. Also note our school is this is our 150th year. We're founded before Colorado was a state. In 1874, and we are a school that entirely focuses on natural resources, their identification, acquisition, and then producing materials and things from them, both energy or materials. And this work in space resources is sort of an extension of that into space. So the title of this talk here is Developing Space Resources Industry. A little bit about the special program we created. It is a graduate program where we offer degrees in space resources. And we'll talk about what that means, but educate scientists, engineers, economists, entrepreneurs, policymakers in this field. We started small in 2017. It is entirely online. You can actually take it from anywhere in the world. And we have someone who's taken our classes from almost every continent. I think now Antarctica is the only continent we haven't had someone from. And the degrees are Master of Science, a PhD, and a post-baccalaureate certificate. It's a 12-credit certificate. We have been kind of stable for the last couple of years at between 120 and 140 actively enrolled students. We have about 30 to 40 new students entering per year, and we have a number of core faculty, several adjuncts, and a lot of other faculty in other departments at Mines who work with us. So it's an interdisciplinary program. We teach it that way, but we have a lot of engineers, but also a lot of economists and scientists who are in our classes.
And lawyers also.
Yes, and lawyers. Yeah, yes. Law is an important part of this whole subject. I actually don't go into this in my slides here, but yeah, the legality of use of resources in space, what is permitted and what's clearly not, is an active area of discussion. So we'll go to the core of this talk. What are space resources? I kind of like to define things. So I define it as the practice of identifying potential resources in space, implementing technologies to access and process resources, converting them to products, and the use of those products. So then why? That's simply what they are. But why? Why would we want to use them? I have three major reasons I'm going to talk about. One is use of resources enables entirely new ways of operating in space. We could build larger and much more capable missions. One example of this is by sourcing materials from which we can make propellants. We can break the tyranny of the rocket equation that we call it. And that is that launching everything off of Earth requires that you have to load fuel into your rocket engine in order to lift it with fuel further out of the atmosphere. And the net result is that just the delivered payload in space is just a small few percent of the total mass of the rocket sitting on the pad on Earth. But if we can refuel in space, we can extend those missions out further. The majority of our costs to get into space, the cost to move around space is much less than the cost to get to space. You might measure that in what's called delta V, the change in velocity of the spacecraft. It's a measure of the energy sitting in the rocket at launch. So there's a lot of benefits for this, but there's also benefits in building things that allow us to use resources in space rather than put them on a rocket and launch them from Earth. So that's one thing. Similar things to what we do today, but just more capable. Then there's also a benefit to all. This is move our mining in certain industries off of Earth. The concept here is that we could manufacture things in space from resources and then return them to Earth. And instead of having the environmental impact that those industries have on Earth, that impact occurs in space, and this separates it from our own biosphere. That benefits everyone if we do this. Third is an expansion of humanity into space. This is the ideas of building large structures in space, such as the picture in the upper right. That's a version of an O'Neill colony, a free-floating, very massive spacecraft that spins to simulate gravity and filled with an atmosphere. Or we build on the moon or Mars and build places where significant numbers of people can live and work. And also inserted here is one thing everyone in the space industry worldwide knows of is the Kardashev scale. This is the idea that a civilization could progress through these different stages, with the first being access to all of the power and energy of your home planet. And then that expands to the power and energy of the solar system of your origin, and then later galaxy scale. That I thought was appropriate for this audience, but it is something we think about. A human expansion into space to just I think humans are naturally explorers and look for new frontiers, and I think the coming frontier is space.
To depend less on Earth, right? That's what space resources will achieve, hopefully.
Yeah, Right. And you can this all benefits Earth to have the expansion of humanity into space with numbers of people, but majority of the new people living and working in space to learn new things, and new discoveries would benefit Earth ultimately, and all of humanity. The lower left is an example of that actually comes from more of the current day activity and thinking about what we would be doing in space using resources. This is comes from a NASA and a business that's helping to develop methods of building landing pads on the moon. What you see in the picture is a bunch of robotic systems that are delivering a sintering regolith, the natural broken surface, basically pulverized rock of the surface of the moon, sintering it into brick-like forms. You also, if you look carefully, you'll see that there's a location that's also been prepared. The surface is cleared of rocks and craters and compacted before you build on it. And so this is one example of enabling new things in space that enable the missions we would like to do in the near term. The mining in space, industry off of space, in space, and humanity moving into space are all later stages that could come that we're working toward. But its first steps are using resources to enable missions we currently plan.
I will ask, simple questions. Like, I'm not your student, but from general audience, why we need the landing pads on the moon, and why we need to prepare the surface.
Yeah. So there's the issue with the reason why we think we need landing pads is that we are looking forward to what we will land on the moon. We are going to be landing some very large rockets. This is to enable human exploration of the moon at a scale that's larger than we did before. And larger rockets excavate more regolith on the surface. The regolith is loose and easily removed by the rocket plume as the vehicle lands.
And regolith is moon dirt, right?
Right.
We can quote simple terms.
Yeah, right. Yeah, moon dirt, pulverized rock. You can say dirt or soil. There's nothing organic in it. It's very dry as well. And so the rockets that land on the moon will blow that moon dirt away, and that creates a crater that then could be a risk that the rocket landing leg makes too deep a crater and it falls into the crater and could topple over. Also, if we are building up infrastructure in the same location nearby where we're landing and doing this frequently, well, every time we land, if we are allowing the regolith, the moon dirt to
no, you can call it regolith. We explain it to people. Yeah.
if we are allowing that to blow away, that then could damage the equipment we have put nearby. I think we talk about it as sandblasting. It's the scouring, or the regolith that is scoured off the surface, flies away, strikes a structure like a solar panel and damages it. So we want to avoid that. So a landing pad helps both these things. And then the preparation of the surface is needed because the natural lunar surface is pockmarked by craters. So there's no atmosphere on the moon, of course. And the result of one of the things about that then is every asteroid of every size strikes the surface. You don't even notice it here, but we don't on Earth, something that would create a 1 meter crater rarely makes it to the surface. It burns up in the atmosphere. But on the moon, it always does. And so the surface just has a large number of craters across the surface. So if you're going to build on it, you need to do some site preparation. Also, in order for the pad to carry the load of the rocket, that load is distributed down into the surface, and the surface needs to be uniform, compacted, and compacted in order for the loads to be distributed. So those are our reasons for thinking about landing pads and building. This is probably one of the first things that would happen that uses space resources on the moon.
So first stages of creating infrastructure on the moon, I think.
Yes. Yeah, it is a landing pad. It's sintering. Well, there are other ideas. So sintering regolith is just kind of fusing the grains of the soil together with heat. There are some other ideas that have been thought of and being researched, like bringing with us a cement of some type, like a polymer or a binder, you might say, that could be added to the regolith and then fuse it together. That has that is in some ways, well, it is possible, but one of the issues is then you're carrying some mass with you from Earth, which you rather just deliver a device that turns the regolith into brick. Although you might also want it more like you turn it into a concrete slab, but it's sintered regolith instead of concrete. So but where? So the more about resources, like where they are in space. We've just been talking a bit about the moon, and you see there on the moon regolith. It's across the moon. There's at least two different types. The dark regions are lava flows and we call those mare, and the white regions are highlands. They're pulverized original crust of the moon. There's also volatiles across the moon, particularly volatiles. Volatiles here mean a material that in its naturally occurring state is solid, but when heated to kind of typical atmospheric conditions, like 20 degrees Celsius and 1 atmosphere, it becomes a gas. One of the locations for volatiles are at the poles of the moon in permanently shadowed regions. These regions are mostly craters that are very close to the pole. And another little thing about the moon is that the sun the sun stays very near the horizon of the moon with very little variation. And on Earth the sun travels from, if you're at high latitude, near the horizon. Well, actually, it travels travels across the sky by 20 degrees. It's the axial tilt of Earth. On the moon, this is only 5 degrees. No, it's 1.5 degrees. And so this creates regions that have primarily impact craters that the sun has never shone within them and hit the crater floor. So they become very cold and they trap volatiles. Much of those volatiles are water. The minerals of the moon also have value. We also identify just light, photons, as their space resource. We've been using this since the dawn of the space age with solar panels on our spacecraft. We also identify the location in space and microgravity and vacuum as other resources of space that we can use, particularly for things like telecommunications and manufacturing. Particularly vacuum and microgravity used for manufacturing. We can find similar things like minerals, metals, ices on asteroids. Some of those are near-Earth asteroids that cross Earth's orbit or are at a small propulsion cost to get to them. Then Mars is is a significant destination in mind that a lot of people would like to go to and explore and build cities there. And it has a large amount of accessible resources in terms of ice, carbon dioxide atmosphere, regolith, again, hydrated minerals. It's a much more Earth-like than anything else in the solar system. So these are just some examples of resources. There are, of course, other places in the solar system, but this is the kind of scope of what it called the near-term resources we can consider: moon, asteroids, and Mars, and cislunar space. That's the space between and within the Earth and Moon.
And do you agree that we would use Moon as a test test bed for extracting the resources, and then after that it will be easier for us to explore Mars.
Yes, that is I'd agree with that, and that definitely is the plan. NASA has a plan for exactly that. They call it the Moon to Mars program. And I view it as there are technologies that directly translate to Mars. Electrolysis is one. So converting a material like water into hydrogen and oxygen. We do this via electrolysis. And then we want to actually then take hydrogen and oxygen and liquefy it, make it cryogenic temperatures. And that's another process for another system that has to be developed that we can have compact and reliable and function in space. And that would be directly transferable to Mars. There's also the learning of how to operate in space when you either have robotic systems that are doing a complex sequence of tasks, or you have humans, astronauts and cosmonauts in space near the moon who are relying on themselves and less on mission control, and learning how to operate as in a more independent way than we have in our up until more than we have to date in any human operation in space. So I think those are the kinds of things, those kind of learning how to operate in space where you're really independent from Earth, and then particular places where the technology can translate from Moon to Mars or asteroids to Mars.
Chris, how would you like to proceed? We have already one question. Do you want to finish your presentation, and then we can dive into questions? Or
let's go with that one, since it was so. I see the question that was posted.
Yes.
You want to read? Let's go to that. I'll answer it. So how about you? You want to read it to the audience?
So what are we planning to use for preparing the landing pads, not path? Can we melt up the regolith and make something like lava?
Yes, that is exactly right. When I've been saying a word called sintering, which isn't quite melting the material to the point that it's fully melted and like lava, but so a lava or a full melt is further melting, and you can do that. Sintering is a little more subtle, where it's a process of taking pulverized material, very small particulate material or small particles that then are pressed, and their temperature is increased nearly to the melting point, and this causes the particle contacts to fuse, and you get this is more like a brick material. A full melt of the regolith would be more like glass. So these are both options for producing landing pad material that only use the regolith we have available to us in space, like applying heat and seeing if you can get to the point that you sinter, and so it's brick-like or concrete-like in its final form, or it's glass-like, which would be a bit more like lava. There are pros and cons of both these things. When either process actually produces oxygen coming out of the material, and that might be something you could capture and use somewhere else. But it also can create bubbles in the melt that then can disturb it and kind of change the porosity and strength of the material. So a lot of work is going into just how best to apply heat to get to a sintered material or a melt material, and then what is the final property? What are the final mechanical properties of that material? And that matters a lot for landing pads. Should also say, like the power has to come from somewhere. One fundamental thing about resources is we need power. So while power itself isn't a space resource, except photovoltaics are, power from the sun. It's a very important adjacent field to develop new power systems for space that are much more powerful than we've had before. So we do think about big solar array farms on the moon that would collect a lot of power. Hundreds of kilowatts would be nice. We could probably center pads like this at a more kilowatt level. But more power you have, the faster you can do things.
Or even using nuclear reactors, but I know it's like it's 50-50, right? The division.
Yeah, well, nuclear reactors are there, and there's a lot of talk about developing new nuclear reactors for space and getting them flown. On the other one, since we're talking about heat, melting things is concentrated solar power. So reflectors that take sunlight directly and focus it to melt material. That has a lot of benefits because we're not converting it first to electrons like we do with photovoltaics or nuclear. But these are kind of related thing. How do we deliver the power, and then how do we heat the material, and what form we heat it to, the sintered form versus a melt form.
And then we use 3D printers technology or like systems, right, to print the landing pads, roads, and etc.
Right. Well, that certainly is a tool. A lot of it is 3D printing. This example here that you see, it's a little unclear a bit, but it is a 3D printing process. But it is a little simplified. It's more of a concept image than a technical image. But but yes, 3D printing. But some other ideas are more like build a kiln and make bricks. And the bricks in that case wouldn't be 3D printed, but they might be. Everything would be likely placed robotically. And even if we make bricks, we might need to think about how to produce a mortar that bonds the bricks together, or have interlocking bricks. So there's 3D printing is definitely in a lot of discussion in 3D printing of these kinds of structures. So, but a lot of opportunities for clever people to come up with ways to combine these different things to find the best overall solution.
So do you think it's civil engineers, material scientists, right? That's mining engineers?
Yes, all of them. Mechanical engineers, computer scientists, roboticists, all have, for the technical issues of producing these things, all have a very important place. I'd say scientists who are studying these kind of nature of the regolith, the lunar surface, also are needed. It's a very multidisciplinary field where it is quite beneficial to have some experience in a broad range of fields. So, all right, how about we go on to the next couple things, which are more definitions. And I actually introduced in my class this concept of use in space. I've already mentioned it. This is things like the landing pads, but use in space is simply using resources in space, and these resources remain in space. We do this because some things I've already mentioned, but reduce mission cost, enhance mission capabilities, enable entirely new missions that you couldn't conceive of without using resources, and it would also create new industries. This picture here, this artist concept comes actually probably, I didn't put the artist. If you look carefully, you can see it's Morrison's artwork, but comes from actually I believe in the 70s they were talking about this of a lunar-based industry where oxygen's being produced, shipped off the moon to refuel spacecraft in space. And actually on the sign, there's a couple other things like helium-3. Helium-3 is a solar wind implanted volatile that is on any airless body in space, but it's been captured in the lunar regolith, and it is a potential, has some unique properties. It's an isotope of helium that has the potential to be used as a fuel in nuclear fusion. It can be processed in a way that releases no radiation and a lot of power. So this is a potential to become something that is my next thing, which is actually I skipped here to return to Earth, which is the delivery of resources or a manufactured item to Earth. We talked about this as mining in space and manufacturing in space and returning things back to Earth. It's an antonym of use in space. So it's the opposite. In use in space, we keep everything that we acquire in space. In return to Earth, we're returning something. And in returning it to Earth, we have that material needs to be competitive against terrestrial markets. So the upper picture is a concept called space-based solar power, where sunlight's converted to energy, then to microwaves, beamed to the ground, captured on the ground in a rectenna, and then distributed as power. It would seem to be feasible. There are studies that have been done, and none discount the possibility that it could work. Building this thing using resources would be a great benefit to make it more feasible. And then the lower picture is concept art that came from a company that existed for a couple years, Deep Space Industries, and their mere concept art for how to mine an asteroid.
Yeah, and we can also talk about the recent company that appeared, Interlune, that wants to extract helium on the moon, right?
Right. Yeah. Interlune is exactly. So that's a helium-3 mining company, and yeah, they could be here as well. Probably more relevant and recent. They're actively developing technologies to mine helium-3 on the moon and return it to Earth. I should say also, I did mention helium-3 is one of its ultimate uses would be nuclear fusion, but there are other near-term uses. It's useful in medical imaging and certain types of radiation detectors, and it has a market today. It is a very high. The price on it per kilogram is extremely high. You don't measure it in per kilogram; it's too much. You measure it in like micrograms. But it has a very high value today, and the Interlune believes they could be profitable with the current markets for helium-3. You don't need to wait for nuclear fusion to be developed and using helium-3 to be profitable.
Yeah, that's another great example how space resources are helping us here on Earth, or will help.
Yeah. So like if a lot of our global challenges are due to energy, due to use of fossil fuels, of course, are altering the climate. But also the energy drives a lot of our global decision making, how we're going to produce it, where it's going to come from, and a nuclear fusion or space-based solar power separate the means of production of that power from the climate of the Earth. So it's kind of helium-3 coming from the moon would also mean we're not mining on Earth for this material or a material. We're moving that to the moon, and then we're producing power in a way that doesn't produce carbon dioxide and other pollutants.
Yeah, all the fight for resources will transfer to the moon.
Yeah. I thought I'd go back to one more definition just because it comes up often. If you look up this field of space resources, you will come across this term called in situ resource utilization. and the acronym for it is ISRU, or sometimes also pronounced ISRU. This is a NASA-defined term, and I distinguish it from space resources because NASA's defined it and used it in a more limiting context than space resources. There's the definition here. I won't read it for everyone, or should I? Well, let me do it here. The collection, processing, storing, and use of materials encountered in the course of human or robotic space exploration that replace materials that would otherwise be brought from Earth to accomplish a mission-critical need at reduced overall cost and risk. So that's a bit of a mouthful, but it basically says using resources in space to reduce the material we need to deliver to space through in a particular mission that would then reduce the overall mission cost or risk. This I feel is intentional with NASA because a lot of their planning is based around individual missions, like a mission to land humans on the moon. And in doing so, we can evaluate, well, let's do it one way where we don't use any resources. Compare that to another plan in which we do use resources. Do we find that we have a better overall mission, lower cost and lower risk if we use resources? And that's the basic evaluation NASA's doing frequently with their missions when they look at space resources. And again, looking at it that way, they're doing ISRU. We also sometimes just call the technologies we're developing ISRU. The value is that it has a value to NASA they can quantify because it's in the context of the mission. I feel space resources is a broader term because you don't look at like building a city on Mars as a single mission. It's a endeavor. It's a bigger picture thing than just a mission. You don't build a business around individual missions. You build it around identifying markets and opportunities, and so.
And there are three basic principles, right, in space resources: the customer, the resource.
That's right. Yeah.
And technology.
Yeah. And that is the principles. Actually, we are part of our guide throughout developing the program, which actually in this slide, this little presentation, I'm not going to do much with that, yeah. And so this is a part of like thinking about it in the natural way. You don't naturally come to this pure mission context, but it's the way NASA looks at it. So if you're looking into the field, you'll come across ISRU, and sometimes there's no distinction between the bigger picture space resources activity and ISRU. Another thing, actually, this is related to getting more business oriented, is to identify the space resources value chain. On the left side of the value chain is the prospecting and exploration. That's a location of locating resources. On the right side is the final customer, person or some organization who will use a resource produced using space resources. So in the middle is mining. And establishing feasibility would be flying before you formally begin a mining operation. You need to do some technology development, deployment of resources that establish that the mine is feasible. This is, we call it the extraction of resources period. And then processing and manufacturing or building products. I should say a few things about the images I'm showing. On the left side are there's a mineral map of both the near side and far side of the moon produced from orbital data. Below that is a ice map or a hydrogen map of the lunar South Pole based on neutron spectroscopy imaging of the surface from orbital missions. And then the two middle, the other images are all concept images. And there's an excavation rover that's frequently used in NASA presentations to show like excavation of the regolith. Next to that, under make products, is another additive manufacturing concept to build habitats on the Martian surface. And this particular one combines use of just the raw regolith mixed with a polymer that's made on Mars from water and the CO2 atmosphere. And then the right is a concept image from an architectural firm contracted by ESA to do a study on a lunar base that was done several years ago under what was called the ESA Moon Village program. But that can view that as lots of resources are being used there to produce that base. The people would live and work there and study and explore the moon are just the customers for the resources. And there may be businesses that exist across this entire value chain, perhaps starting from the left side all the way to the right. They may even be their own user, but there may be other small businesses that focus on one thing. Say, build an excavator that delivers material to someone else who's going to make products from it. So, and that could occur on the moon or Mars or asteroids.
So from your point of view, what is more challenging now, the technology or finding actually the customer for the space resource that you're planning to mine or extract?
I think the customer still remains challenging. But they go together. When your customer, so it's a couple things. They're pure governmental customers like NASA or ESA, who have identified that they like to use resources, but they need to see that it's technically feasible, and going back to like ISRU, that can be shown that it reduces mission risk, or at least doesn't increase mission risk, and maybe maintains mission risk where it is while reducing costs. And that case requires us to really define what our technologies are that would develop these resources. So for instance, then we have to have, there is some uncertainty about certain resources. Like there isn't uncertainty that there are ices in the lunar PSRs, but there is uncertainty in just what the concentration is in any particular location. And then while we also say we think there's depth dependent concentration, that how basically there might be a meter deep with good amounts of ice. And that is different from it's right on the surface. So the technologies need to be different depending on the nature of the resource, which we don't have adequate information on for the lunar PSRs. But we have really adequate information on regolith itself. So hence we can begin to think about making landing pads, sintering and making bricks or making concrete-like materials. So I kind of just answered it by saying the customer, but they're looking for everything else to be solved and then say, yes, we can use it. There are other things happening that are kind of not government customers. There are companies being built that are relying on or looking to convince satellite manufacturers that they should plan to refuel their spacecraft. And then if they do, then they or others will be prepared to deliver propellant to them. That then creates a market for propellant in space that will allow others to perhaps first refuel from propellant that's launched from Earth, but later transition to propellant that's mined in space. So there are pure commercial things happening as well, where entrepreneurs building businesses are promoting these ideas to convince the end user satellite manufacturer, to use their capabilities. But the market has to exist. This is all very challenging because it's like the market doesn't exist. So you have to find ways to promote its development. Governments planning space exploration can help with that. But then they have to see that it clearly improves the mission they would run. So there is evidence NASA is there. They are believing in this. And they continually need to see evidence, and not evidence that the missions like human exploration of the moon and then later Mars will benefit from space resources. But we think we've crossed that bridge, and we're definitely in. NASA believes it now. NASA at a agency wide at the highest levels believes in this. There was a time, maybe a couple decades ago, where it wasn't common belief that this was the way to do things, and everything would have to be launched from Earth. But it was shown that was simply unrealistic to launch everything from Earth and, say, explore Mars. And that was kind of one of the beginnings of one clear use case of making propellant on Mars for a human exploration plan to explore Mars and then return the astronauts back to Earth on a rocket that's fueled from propellant made on Mars. That was one case where it really became evident this makes a lot of sense.
And I know that market is growing. We know several startup companies that live off the NASA grants, right? That work purely on space resources.
Right. Yeah. Yes, we do. And I would say, we have that. A company can exist for a while off research grants or technology development grants, but eventually the technology has to be adopted in wide scale use. And the expectation is that there will be that within NASA, there will be that for landing pads on the moon. Can't be certain at this time that that's going to happen for the permanently shadowed region ices. I should mention as well that in the process of making and sintering regolith, you produce oxygen. There's also some other processes that directly extract oxygen, and in doing so, they actually will can produce metals as well from the regolith. But the oxygen is, depending on your rocket engine, the mass of your propellant is 75 to 80% oxygen. So there is also a propellant concept that is purely based around oxygen because it's a large fraction of the mass. And in this case, you could extract oxygen from regolith and deliver the hydrogen or the methane to the moon to be the other component of your rocket engine. And then that's a propellant plan that's not 100% propellant from space, but it's a big fraction. So there's also thought around that.
Okay, so we have 10 minutes left. We have 2 questions. Do you want to finish your?
Yes, so I'll do it in just seconds because last slide was this technology, and I kind of structure it as showing examples from prospecting, extraction and excavation, preparation, processing, and delivery of products. The extraction and excavation image there is a NASA excavator called Razor. There's a version of that they're developing to go to the moon, and it's a unique way of excavating. Not going to get into it because I like to move on to the questions. There's also a little CAD image of the Lunar Viper mission, which will go to the South Pole of the moon. Planning to launch, I think it's about a year from now, and it has some technology that could identify ice if within the near surface of the moon. And then NASA years ago ran missions in Hawaii, kind of field missions, analog studies where they deliver hardware and in situ there on the surface, kind of run systems that are configured to be like a landed mission. And this went from extracting oxygen from the volcanic tephra that was there in Hawaii, the volcano, and collecting regolith with a small excavator, and they kind of did an end-to-end demonstration. So I think that's it for that. But I would also say, that shows the scope of technologies. It's a broad range of things needing a lot of robotic systems and unique, customized, miniaturized processing systems. So let's go to the remaining comments and many more people have.
Yes. Okay, so there is a comment. We conducted an experiment on the electrolysis of hydrogen in stratosphere and determined that it was better and more released there, and accordingly determined that the best place to build a station would be the top of Mount Olympus for hydrogen and oxygen production station. What do you think about that?
That's interesting. Suppose what's happening there is the low pressure is maybe optimizing or leading to a better the low pressure. You're processing at low pressure, and I assume, and that helps with maybe a measure of like energy per kilogram produced. That would be interesting. There are problems with landing on Mount Olympus on Mars. One thing when we think about locating our resource extraction sites on Mars is their proximity to where humans would want to be. And while Mount Olympus is very high, one thought we have is that when we land on Mars, we want to use the atmosphere of Mars to help slow down. We likely are going to land with retro rockets for your human-sized landers. But I'll just point out that there essentially, if you're going to land on Mount Olympus, there is no atmosphere to help you land. And then this might not be where humans would want to be. They'd rather probably be in a kind of a lowland area where there's interesting geology to explore. But it's interesting discovery that maybe that is more beneficial to be there for splitting water. But this is kind of one consideration for locating a large future human settlement on Mars is where to go to have something interesting to do related to possibly exploration or mineral like science, or being located near resources.
Yeah, I think you can place on Mount Olymp the small factory that will produce that. And it's in far future when we have advanced technologies and
yeah. And I will say one other thing. Like everything I just said about locating a human settlement on Mars, there's an implicit. It's always useful to study your implicit assumptions, and everything I just said assumes the top of Mount Olympus is too far from your preferred sites. But if we have more mobility, which also is enabled by more resource use, it may not be. So for instance, we don't think we're going to go to the poles of the moon, but one pole of the moon is entirely water ice. The other is a mix of CO2 and water ice. And this is because if we go close to the poles, we have long periods of darkness. Same in North. You're above the Arctic Circle. That's presents challenges, bigger challenges if you're entirely solar powered, but less if you're nuclear powered. And so everything does based on a set of assumptions. It might be feasible to ballistically hop around Mars if we have sufficient resources. It might be possible to have long distance treks with rovers and things like that. So just another caveat on that.
Yeah. Okay. Another question. I think the person meant about helium. Is it expensive because of rarity and usefulness?
Yeah, I think that was helium-3.
Yeah.
Yes, rarity, I think. There are certain types of nuclear reactors that can produce helium-3. The production rate's not very high. There is anywhere we get helium from, there's helium and helium-3 in the atmosphere, but it is extremely rare. I don't know the numbers, but it's measured perhaps in the parts per million in the atmosphere. I believe as well you can get helium out of certain deposits of natural gas. Methane that you can extract out of the ground will contain some other dissolved gases, and helium, therefore helium-3 is one of them. Anywhere you find helium, you'll find some fraction of helium-3. Very, very small. It's a very rare isotope of helium. So it is correct that the rarity is what drives the cost. And we tend not to mine or produce it just for its own sake, if you will. Like we do a lot with processing of the atmosphere for liquid nitrogen and liquid oxygen. And in the process of doing that, we can extract helium as well. But it's kind of not our main goal for processing the atmosphere. For mining, where we can get it out of gases dissolved in natural gas, we're mining and producing natural gas. We're not doing it for the helium, but it's a byproduct. So rarity is what drives the price.
Okay, so there was a third question asking to share your PowerPoint presentation, but this live stream will be recorded and it will be on YouTube, so you could go through this presentation yourself. The next question is, I think we will keep it for our Zoom meetup because it's pretty, I think it will require, it says, what has been the historical approach to space resources and how has it evolved over the last 2 decades? So,
Maybe I'll mention that just one little teaser for that is we can talk more in the other time I'm going to talk with you. But the use of resources in space has been studied and thought about even before the dawn of the space age. Like this has been on people's minds who have thought about space and thought about how to go into space. Even before we knew exactly how to do it, people were thinking about, we'll use resources when we do it. During the Apollo missions, people were thinking about this and beginning to plan. And then, unfortunately, the plans for follow-on work after the first landings were canceled. And even what we're doing today at Colorado School of Mines, we can trace our kind of heritage back to that era, even though that I wasn't around then, or I was just a kid. But there were a lot of people thinking about this and developing thoughts on how to do it, working consistently over decades to convince the administrations and the leadership of NASA that we really must invest in doing this. And in the last couple of decades, it's turned around from guarded interest to active decisions that we're going to develop technologies to use the resources. So yeah, it's evolved over years, but it's existed. The concepts existed since the first people were thinking about space and what it meant and thinking about it in terms of exploration.
Yeah, and we can talk about it more on July 26th. We will have a Zoom, and each of you can ask questions directly and talk to Chris. We have like 1 minute left, and my last question, Chris, how can young engineers, scientists get involved in the field of space resources?
Well, okay, study. in whatever field you want to go into, there is a way to enter into space resources. You could do, science and engineering are always there, but that's not necessarily the only route. There's law, there's development of business and finance, economics, where there's all these fields are needed. These fields of knowledge are needed to develop resources. So work on your education, work hard, do projects of your own that you conceive of to show the way you think about how to solve problems, and don't just rely on the textbooks, but also get out there and do things. So that's those are a few things.
Thank you so much. It was so interesting. Such a pleasure as always. And we'll see you in a few weeks on July 26th. So please, the audience, join us. And soon you'll have 4th of July. So happy 4th of July.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.